GoNexus Horizon 2020 project. And first, I don't know if the organizer of the series of webinar, Laura or Matilde, want to say a few words about this series of webinar that we are promoting from GoNexus.
Yes, just quickly. So this one is the first webinar, and we are preparing others webinars. So just be aware on the website or signing up to receive our newsletter so that you will be informed on the upcoming webinars. And if you have any questions during this session, there is the conversation channels in Teams, or otherwise there is also the Q&A option you can use. I will try to read all your questions. So yeah, feel free to ask.
So thank you very much, Matilde. So as I said, welcome everybody to this webinar. I am Manuel Pulido Velázquez. I am the coordinator of the GoNexus project. GoNexus is an Horizon 2020 project on integrated solutions for governing the Nexus. So it's we are working on innovative tools and solutions for governing the water, the energy, food, and ecosystem. So we call this the WEFE nexus under global change. So as part of the activities of GoNexus projects, within the dissemination activities, we are organizing a series of webinars in which we are going to present the main approaches and results that we are obtaining in the GoNexus project. This first one webinar is about the co-design of with the stakeholders, the co-design of solutions. Can you go to the first one, please, Matilde, to the first slide? Yeah, so co-designing the WEFE Nexus scenarios, and what lessons can we learn from this co-design. So we are going to see how we are involved. We are including the development of the scenarios, co-design with the stakeholders within the whole process for assessing and improving the governance of the Nexus. So next slide, please. So this is the agenda of the webinar. So a brief introduction by myself, then an overview of objective methodological approaches to develop WEFE Nexus with the stakeholders. First results from one of the case studies we have in Africa, the Senegal case study. First results from the case study Tagus-Segura River basins. That in GoNexus we are treating them as a single case study just because of the linkage they have through the interbasin water transfer. Then conclusions, lessons, and next steps, and finally question and answers that will be very happy to interact with you. So next, please. So basically, we know that there is a high interconnection between the water, the energy, the food, and ecosystems sectors, but often we have the problems that they are managed as independent silos. Even the policy and the institutions are usually independent, and they're missing this connection. And also for future scenarios and global changes, they have a significant impact because of this interconnection. So we have to provide more food for growing population, for example. So that's required, of course, more water, more energy, and it has an impact on ecosystems. So we need to consider the interaction and the trade-off between different sectors in order to analyze future developments. In this project, in GoNexus, we are considering different spatial scales. So we have a global scale, a global analysis. We have also the analysis per continent for Europe, and we have also the river basin cases. No? And in the river basin cases, we are also explicitly analyzing the trade-off between the different components of the silo. And for this analysis of challenges, solution, and trade-off and scenarios, we are always engaging the stakeholders in this process. So next slide, please. So this is basically the methodology we have in the GoNexus project. I think it's a very comprehensive methodology to tackle the complex issue of the nexus. Basically, it's based on, we have two sets of dynamic tools that we are using in this project. On the one hand, we have a model toolbox. The model toolbox we have here is basically a combination of different models addressing the different sectors, and also with the interlinkages and trade-off among them. And those models are developed at the global scale, also at the European scale for the analysis of the European situation regarding the nexus, and also at the river basin scale. So here you can see the different river basin cases we have in the project. We have 4 cases in Europe: the Danube Basin, the Lake Como, Italy, Switzerland, the Júcar River Basin in Spain, and the Tagus-Segura River Basin, including the interbasin transfer. We are just modeling the part that is included in Spain. And then, so that's basically the modeling toolbox, but we are combining this with the Nexus dialogues. So a participatory process with the stakeholders in which in a round of 3 different dialogues, we are identifying the key challenges and the policy relevant challenges. We are co-designing scenarios and solutions. And finally, we are validating, we are providing the feedback of the model results and validating the solutions with the stakeholders. So the idea is to use the dialogues and the model toolbox to provide evidence on the results of the nexus, and this is done for different scenarios. So there is a current situation or baseline reference scenario. Then we have future scenarios, including global change, but also socioeconomic and policy changes. And for those scenarios, we provide evidence and we provide solutions. So we test the solution using the models and the dialogues. And the idea is also that the solutions are coming back to be discussed through the dialogues. So next, please. Well, we have 17 partners in the project from Europe, but also from Africa and from Canada. Canada is in the University of Laval in Quebec. In Europe, we have different universities, we have research center, and we have SMEs. In the case of Africa, we have University of Dakar for the Senegal case, in collaboration also with OMBS. And we have Thancon, which is the River Basin Authority for the Zambezi River. Next one, please.
So thank you, Manuel, for this introduction. I will now present the approach of scenarios co-designing we used in the 2 river basins we will talk about today, so Senegal River Basin and Tagus-Segura. So we are using the same methodological approach to engage stakeholders into a future thinking exercise, which is scenarios co-designing. Scenarios are conceived as projections into the future that allows us to assess the potential impacts that global changes, climatic, socioeconomic, demographic, are likely to generate on water uses in a river basin. and explore actions or management alternatives that could be implemented to mitigate negative impacts. Why co-designing scenarios? To develop a systemic understanding of all the dimensions of the WEFE nexus based on different types of knowledge, scientists, policymakers, stakeholders, and water users, local population. So institutional actors, but also actors further removed from decision-making processes. Each one may have a partial vision of the complex system to which they belong, and co-designing scenarios helps raise awareness of the various factors influencing the evolution of the system as a whole. And second, to integrate the convergent or divergent visions of the river management. So all the different water users and countries, in the case of transboundary river, think they have legitimate claim to water with often competing objectives. Co-designing policy scenarios enables broader debate on water allocation priorities, for example. And rather than restricting this discussion to a small group of decision makers and experts, we aim to incorporate a plurality of perspectives and alternatives, expanding possibilities for future public action. Now, I will comment a diagram summarizing the approach used to co-design and evaluate river basin scenarios in the two case studies. First step is an understanding of the river basin context by reviewing existing policy documents. Step 2, we collected stakeholders' knowledge and viewpoints through the interview. And step 3, we conducted the first dialogue to build a common understanding of these different elements of the nexus and main factors of change and strategic policy visions. Then we developed narrative scenarios depicting different possible long-term evolution of the river basin. And step 4, these scenarios were presented and discussed with stakeholders during dialogue 2. And now we are currently at step 5, which is the translation of qualitative scenarios into quantitative ones. And this work is based on other inputs like policy documents and global models. And step 6, the river basin model is used to simulate scenarios. In step 7 is the approach used to define the range of possible hydroclimatic conditions. And to finish, step 8, a third dialogue will be organized to present and discuss the modeling results with stakeholders. At the end, we provide recommendations on how the outcomes of this approach can inform decision-making processes in river management. Now, a quick overview of the tools used to facilitate scenarios understanding. Scenarios are described through narrative presentations or stories, and we use fictitious press articles which involve fictional characters and relate facts supposedly taking place in the years 2030 and 2040. And each narrative scenario is a qualitative description of the possible future of the river basin and of the relationships and dynamics of the different elements of the nexus. Stories provide context and a holistic view of the scenarios, and stakeholders can better grasp the interconnection between various factors, impacts, and the adaptation strategy when presented in a narrative format. And stories have the ability to evoke emotions and create a connection with the audience in a non-technical language. And second, the scenarios developed are policy scenarios presented in the form of simplified timelines. So it's another way to present scenario. And scenarios include hypotheses of management and development choices that could be taken in the future. And they are constructed to explore with stakeholders the potential impacts of various policy choices. And to finish, a very quick overview of the tools used to facilitate dialogue between stakeholders. Workshops were designed to encourage the exchange of viewpoints and facilitate mutual understanding. For example, in Dialogue 1, we used participatory modeling tools like RD method. We used participatory mapping to explore the impacts of policy scenarios and their spatial distribution across the river basin. We also used interactive survey to collect individual perspective on the main hypotheses within the scenarios, assessing whether they are viewed as realistic or desirable. And the results were displayed live during the workshops, prompting discussions to clarify the differing viewpoints and positions. So now, Laurent will present the first results from Senegal River Basin case study.
Yes, thank you, Laura, for this presentation. Hello, everyone. So now we can dive a bit in the first result from the Senegal River case study in Africa. Next slide, please. Yes. So as you may know, Senegal River Basin is located in West Africa. It's a large watershed shared by 4 countries, Guinea, Mali, Senegal, and Mauritania. And since the 70s, the Senegal River is managed at international level by the OMVS, which is the Basin Authority. And OMVS has developed many programs for hydropower production with dams and large-scale irrigation that are now important water uses compared to the traditional water uses like fishing or flood recession farming. And in the future, to face climate change and population growth, OMVS has planned to build many dams for the next decade. Next slide. So to co-design the future scenarios on the different pathway of development in Senegal River, we did 2 workshops with 31 participants coming from different sectors. They come from private companies, public authorities, as well as researchers, NGOs, or local representatives. And we did 2 workshops, one in Dakar, one in Saint Louis. Next slide. And during this workshop, we have in the first step, especially during the first workshop, identified the current and future challenges of WEFE nexus. And the 4 main challenges are those one. The first is between, I would say, energy and food security, because in fact, since the construction of Manantali Dam, it has been a question of finding compromise between regulated flows, which are beneficial to hydropower and irrigation, and with floods, which are the source of the flood-based livelihood like fishing and flood recession farming. The second is also dedicated to the flood, its preservation of aquatic ecosystem due to the alteration of the hydrological regime. The third is the reduction of pollution from agricultural and mining activities, especially because since the last decade, there is an explosion of gold mining activities in the Falémé sub-basin. And stakeholders, they also identify one challenge about governance and the improvement of dialogue between international and local level. Next step. After that, based on these challenges, in a second step, we have developed contrasted scenario for the future. Like Laura said, these scenarios are narrative. It means that we are trying to tell very different stories about the future condition of agriculture, water infrastructure, ecosystem. So the stakeholders who are involved in workshop can easily visualize and imagine the future condition. So we have developed 3 scenarios. First, I would say classic one is full business, which is based on a complete infrastructure development in the basin, like many dams, large-scale irrigation. Irrigation is based on agribusiness for exportation. There is a maximum flow regulation in the river, and it's accompanied by environmental degradation. The second is more balanced. It's a scenario in which the water is in the heart of a ecosystem and social development. So here the dams are reduced to the minimum. The reservoir provides some flows for ecosystem based on the principle of artificial flood, and here the actual system is more diversified. And the third scenario is based on the solar revolution that has been seen in other countries and other river basins. And this one is the idea of using low-cost solar panel for irrigation. So this can increase the small-scale irrigation and also limit the need for big hydropower infrastructures. And it comes some negative impacts like the groundwater overexploitation. Next slide. So once we have defined the scenarios, we need to evaluate them to determine if they are realistic or not. It helps us also to refine some assumptions. For example, in the scenario 2 about artificial flooding, stakeholders say they agree that it's a possibility for the future, but they claim it's not possible if there is no compensation between the different countries. So we had this idea of compensation in the scenarization. And also after that, we try to assess the robustness of the different scenarios to external shocks like climate, like inflation, like degradation in transboundary cooperation. So we can see that some scenarios are more sensitive to different shocks, like the scenario 1 looks more sensitive to multi-year droughts. Scenario 3 is less sensitive or more resilient to degradation in cooperation because there is less need for cooperation. So this was the example for Senegal River. I let my colleague from UPV to talk about Spanish case studies.
Yeah, thank you, Laurent. Yeah, those are now the first results for the basins of Tagus and Segura. Yes, so as you may know too, the Tagus River Basin and the Segura River Basin are located at the Iberian Peninsula. Okay, the Tagus River, being the longest in the peninsula, shares two different countries, Spain and Portugal, and encompasses the two capital cities of Madrid and Lisbon. The upper part of the the upper part of the basin has the pressure of the huge urban demand of the city of Madrid, together with the water transfer that sends water to the Segura River basins, while on the other hand, the downstream part is characterized by being a cascade of hydropower production. Regarding the Segura River Basin, it's located at the southeastern part of Spain. It's a very water-stressed system where agriculture production is very relevant. So as you can see, there's like an imbalance between water availability and water demand. Yeah, next, Laura, please. Yeah, thank you. So those are the workshops we were having in Murcia and Madrid. In both dialogues, there were representatives of all the WEFE sectors that were actively participating in the exercises, but also we have stakeholders for all different sectors, such as public entities, academia, private companies, NGOs, so on. Next. Yeah, so in the city of Madrid, we presented two different scenarios for the Tagus. The first one has more to do or is more oriented towards the environmental safeguard, where the water transfer is very strictly reduced, so the ecological flows are prioritized, but therefore also the hydropower production is reduced. On the other hand, the scenario number 2, the water transfer is still active, what basically means that this water transfer is somehow suffocating the Tagus. Here also the hydropower production is prioritized. In both the scenarios, so they had in common that the photovoltaic energy develops, and also there's a shift from rain-fed agriculture into irrigating land. But for the second one, the shift is mainly fed through groundwater use, and therefore the aquifers are so heavily affected. Yeah, next. Yeah, those are the scenarios we presented in the city of Murcia for the Segura. The first one is also more greenish, the one going toward the ecological transformation, where the ecosystems and their services are prioritized, and there's also a reduction on the use of groundwater. On the other hand, for the second scenario, there's a sustainable energy transformation where the agriculture is prioritized. So we presented the scenarios in a way that, so in both cases, the active, the water transfer was still active but reduced. For the second scenario, since agriculture is prioritized, there was a need to compensate this lack of resource and through desalination. For both scenarios, also the photovoltaic energy developed. Yeah, next. Yeah, and here are the first results that we have for this dialogue. For doing this, we use the WCLAB tool, where the stakeholders were evaluating so how realistic or robust this scenario was, these narratives that we presented to stakeholders. For doing that, we had the assumptions coming from our narratives that we transcribed into statements where with their cell phones, the stakeholders could vote rate the feasibility of these statements. So how real or how probable this statement might happen in the future. So here is an example of one of the scenarios where you can really see like we have like 11 statements and 9 users or so stakeholders where they could rate of for different levels for highly probable till highly improbable. Our first result says that what was interesting for us in order to reshape or rewrite this narrative was that in the Tagus, so the donor basin still sees that the water transfers will be full active, while in the Segura they don't really rely on this source, and this source should be replaced or through desalination. There's for the Tagus, due to climate change, there's also an increase on irrigated land. So there's a shift from rain-fed to irrigated. What comes with an increase on groundwater use? On the other hand, for the Segura, this use of groundwater will be very limited. And desalination will be the main source of water. For both scenarios, the photovoltaic energy also develops. Next, Laurent. Yeah, thank you. Okay, and now just for finalizing, so the conclusions or some key lessons learned. So the Senegal case and the Spanish cases, it's true that we, through the mobilization phase, it was not always easy to bring all the WEFE components on the table. We both had issues when regarding the energy sector. And also when we are talking about transboundary basins, so we saw that it was important that all countries in the basin were present during the exercises in the workshops. Also, we, as Laura said, we were using non-technical language in order to integrate all stakeholders. And we also observed, so for stakeholders was very important, fundamental, the transparency through the whole process. So not just like, okay, this is the methodology, this is what we want to do, what we want from us, but also our feedback to you. So, and that was highly valued actually from the part of the stakeholders. And we also think that this type of tools, this process, this methodology, like allows to the stakeholders to project themselves in future situations where they really can think about actions that might avoid or mitigate this future crisis. And now my colleague Laurent will follow up with the last slides.
Yes, thank you, Paul. Yeah, mobilizing a transdisciplinary approach which involve different stakeholders, helps us, I mean, as scientists, and especially in a project where the modeling part is very central, can include integrate broader knowledge, especially technical knowledge from the different stakeholders. So it makes it possible to define a scenario assumption, which is very particularly interesting in the framework of the WEFE nexus, in which we have different sectors. Just to tell you that in the GoNexus project, some case studies like Senegal also include some participation in the local level, because we did, the University of Dakar did some workshop in different villages in the Senegal River Valley. So we want to include the third knowledge, which is the local based knowledge. And also we can say that with this approach, we want to facilitate the integration of our research findings into the decision-making process. So co-thinking, co-designing scenario can help stakeholders to choose also their future pathways towards sustainability and not simply endure a future condition. Next slide, please. And to conclude, what are we doing with the scenario we built, we presented here today? Now we have co-designed the scenario. We need to translate them into inputs for our model. So it means that the idea is finally to translate some narrative scenario into quantitative information, quantitative data that we can use as input, like the number of dams, the characteristic, the areas in the future that need to be irrigated, the drinking water needs, the different future crop water and future crop water demand, etc. And after that, we put it into hydroeconomic modeling in combination with hydroclimatic projection. And we will have some information about the different scenarios we have in the Tagus, in the Senegal, and the impact on the WEFE nexus and the trade-off between the different WEFE nexus sector. And with this result, we will go with a third round of dialogues with stakeholders to discuss this result and identify the solution to manage the WEFE nexus for the future. And next slide, the end. So thank you all to listening to us, and we will be happy to answer all the questions. Thank you.
We have Ivan raising his hand, so I think Ivan, you can ask your question or write it. It's up to you.
Okay. Do you listen to me?
Yes, perfectly.
Okay. First of all, thank you all for this webinar, for this presentation. Thank you very much. Yes, I have a question for any of the presenters, and is that it was seen that the mobilization of stakeholders can be a bit complex in this type of studies, right? And I would like to know, in your expertise in these dialogues, what techniques or methodologies do you think that can promote the engagement of stakeholders in this type of co-creation solutions? What did you find? Thank you.
Thank you for your question. So I take examples from the Senegal case study. We try to mobilize stakeholders through actors who are in networks, different networks, like OMVS, which is the Organization for the Management of the River, which has many contacts and which is a good help to mobilize the relevant stakeholders, but also a network of NGOs who was very useful to know and to contact stakeholders, especially at the local level. And then I think what we are trying to do is to have, before each dialogue, before each workshop, we are sending documents, illustrations, fake newspaper, also fictitious press articles to make them aware and to interest them to the subject and to invite them to participate and to think before the workshop. And I think it's a good way to mobilize them.
Thank you.
Yeah, and in the case for the Tagus and the Segura River basins, so for us it was also, and it was very appreciated also by the side of the stakeholders when we were given like a feedback report after the workshops were held, right? So we said like, okay, so like after 1 month or something, we sent a report like, okay, that was thank you, and that was the result or what we were obtaining, and as a in a writing way, right? And it was actually very well received by the part of the stakeholders. Yeah.
We have another question from Betty. She would like to know, how did you transform the narrative scenarios into quantitative scenarios?
Yes, I can answer this. Yeah, this is a good and difficult question to answer because it's a process that depends on the model you are using, the input you need. So the way we did it is we have information on the narrative, and in this narrative we have kind of idea of, for example, the number of water infrastructures like dams or reservoir, the area that will be planned for the irrigation. And after that, we try to really have some quantitative information. I mean, it depends on what your model needs to be fed, but we really try to have like a table of translation of the different sector and information that can be translated into quantitative information.
I have another question from Marco. He's asking if we can give more information on the modeling approach and how will you consider trade-off between sectors and stakeholder needs?
Yeah. Okay. So for the Tagus and the Segura, we are also working on a system dynamics model. Okay. I don't know how familiar is the audience with this type of models, but let's say you can relate different type of variables, and with that you see how when you, let's say, allocate water to some of the sectors, how the others are related to these different type of allocations. So through the system dynamics model, sometimes in a quantitative way, it's more difficult, but you really can get how to say that, like a feeling or image, or how these different sectors are connected and how do they react to different pressures or stresses outside.
Next question from Laure. How you design the fictional journal article, and are they the narratives you mentioned before, and are the final scenarios the stories? she needs some clarification on all these elements. I think it's for you, Laura, maybe.
Yeah, we design scenarios and then we translate them into fictional journal articles, and they are the narratives. The fictitious press articles are the narratives, and for the Senegal there are three narrative scenarios, so 3 fake press articles. And they are not the final scenarios because we presented this first draft in a dialogue, and then the dialogue aim to assess the different assumptions we put on the scenarios. And some assumptions were discussed and modified by stakeholders, and then right now we are translating these scenarios into quantitative assumptions, and after dialogue 3 we will have kind of final scenarios, but you see that scenarios were modified all through the process, all along the process. So the first design is through interviews and the first dialogue, and then they are modified along the process and to be assessed with the model in the last step.
There is another question from Hassan, is asking regarding the Sahel region. How do you take into account political and environmental uncertainty in the modeling?
Yeah, I can answer this question. Yeah, this is very interesting because, like you said, the uncertainty is very high. There is, I would say, 2 ways to include this. It's first, thanks also for this slide. It's first on the hydroclimatic projection. This is the first uncertainty we can have because we will use a different projection to see the different future for climate, so for environmental condition. And for political, in the different scenario, we had some information on especially the cooperation in the transboundary water management. Like I said, we also try to a bit assess and discuss what will happen in the different scenario if the cooperation between the 4 countries is degraded, because the political condition is a bit difficult, because last year, for example, OMVS faced a crisis because Guinea wanted to has lived the OMVS during 3 or 4 months. So we try to integrate this in the different scenario, and in the modeling it depends of we think about, okay, what's happened if we manage, for example, dams and reservoir together as cooperation, or if each country manage it by itself.
Another question from Ivan. In the formulation of scenarios and narrative, was it possible to implement global scale externalities influencing nexus dynamics at the system scale?
I can have a quick answer. In one of the scenarios, we included climate change impacts on the river basin, but the way we invited stakeholders to think about global scale externalities is the exercise presented by Laurent when we try to identify which scenarios are resilient to global externalities, climatic, economic, or diplomatic, and which are not, which are less resilient. So we try to identify the weaknesses or the force of the scenarios in face of global changes.
And sorry, Yeah, and we also, so about the modeling also, like we also work with in the project with global models that fit sometimes our river basin model. So this is also as data input. So we work also with global data.
There is another question, but probably you already answered it, Laurent. It's again about the political framework in Senegal. How such political vision change can influence your results. The fact that the government change and they have the programs called Autoroute de l'eau. Is it something you're aware?
I know a bit this program, but I'm not aware so much. But we have tried to, I would say, have very contrasted scenarios. So the first scenario I talked, like full business, really looks like at this program like Autoroute de l'eau, in which water is seen as just distributed spatially over Africa, transfer from different watershed. And we have the other scenario where it's very different, where the water is more seen as something intersectoral. So yeah, we try to have very balanced and different contrasted vision. And yes, of course, there is the new government, for example, in the Senegal, who have a new idea of how to use maybe water management. But the project was designed. I mean, the first dialogue was designed more than 2 years ago, so it was not too much on the table. And it's finally what I want to say to conclude for this. It's the stakeholders that put really the different vision into around the table. So this is the way we can have it in scenarios.
We still have some time for a couple of questions, so I don't know if we have more questions. Right now, I don't see more questions in the chat. Oh, one question. You mentioned difficulties to consider the world nexus. Do you have any recommendations?
To consider the whole nexus on what, like, while the mobilization phase, or?
Can you develop a bit all interactions?
Okay.
But for me, I would say, if we talk about co-designing, first is trying to have many stakeholders that cover all the different challenges, different sector, different nexus approach. This is for the co-designing part.
Yes. And be patient.
And I forgot something about the mobilization. I think the individual interviews that we led before the first dialogue was very useful to interest stakeholders to talk about the project and to invite them to come to the next dialogue. I think, individual interviews just before is very useful to mobilize stakeholders who usually won't come to this kind of workshops.